You have to have been living under a rock to not know that there's some very strange stories around citizenship and South Africa nowadays. If you've been following the newspaper reports in South Africa, you could be forgiven to think that citizen depends more on who you know rather than what you know or who you are and what you do than the process as well. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight we're looking at the inconsistencies in the way that South African citizenship rights are managed and why obtaining a South African passport is seemingly more of a lucky draw than a legal process. Those are pretty strong words, but the evidence seems to suggest it to be true. Joining me via Skype to talk about this matter is Stefanie de Saude. She's an immigration and citizenship law specialist at the Saude Attorneys in Cape Town. Stefanie, take me through it. I mean, the most obvious example right now is that of South Africa's first family, the Guptas, famous for the 200,000 emails about them, by them and for them, downloaded onto the internet recently. But why do you take issue with their citizenship rights in a country like South Africa?
I think the problem is that most people who have been living in South Africa lawfully for 5 years or longer, and I'm talking about foreigners who qualify for South African citizenship and who go through the motions and the processes and the difficulties of trying to acquire South African citizenship only to have it turned down because, for whatever reason, it's upsetting for them because why does the Guptas qualify for citizenship when the minister's made it clear that they don't qualify? Also, we have a number of South Africans who are being stripped of their citizenship status because without knowing, without doing anything that in their understanding is incorrect or bad, and they want nothing more than to be in South Africa, to live here, to vote, to contribute as a citizen, and they're not able to do that because they're no longer citizens. And they only find out about this loss when they contact Home Affairs for whatever reason. I think that is the biggest issue. It's just the issue of the Guptas is really just what exempts them.
It's a symbol of something that is deeply wrong, perhaps, in the system. You say the minister has said that they don't qualify for South African citizenship. You mean the Home Affairs Minister, the new Home Affairs Minister, or the current Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba, who was Home Affairs Minister and who's implicated in a whole rash of emails to do with the Guptas? Which minister are we talking about specifically here, Stefanie?
It was a statement the Minister Malusi Gigaba made in the middle of last year. It was in a public comment he made saying that extraordinary circumstances existed on which he granted citizenship status to the Guptas. So it was the current finance minister.
Okay,
I
mean, that is important because the Minister Malusi Gigaba, formerly at Public Enterprises, then, of course, at Home Affairs, and now in the National Treasury, his fingerprints are all over the Gupta emails, and he doesn't come out of those particularly well. It's all untested, of course, in courts of law. But he says there were exceptional circumstances. Does he specify at all what those exceptional circumstances might be so that the rest of us who might have friends and family who'd care for a big green South African passport can learn from that?
As far as I know, he doesn't, and I don't think he has since then. What is also particularly interesting is that the Citizenship Act was amended in 2010, and this clause allowing or giving the power the minister to exempt someone who doesn't ordinarily qualify was only implemented in 2010. So it didn't exist before. So it started it was implemented in 2010, and since then the Guptas must have acquired South African citizenship. Also, as far as I know, I think they Indian nationals, and India doesn't allow dual nationality, so I'm not sure if they've given that up or if they've retained it or how that works. But from a citizenship perspective, they are citizens as far as we understand.
Now, this raises a whole bunch of interesting questions all of their own as well, of course. The Gupta family are South African citizens. They are, as far as we know, taxpayers, at least on VAT, and other issues as well. There's a lot of water to flow under that particular bridge. But when it comes to citizenship, how hard is it for an ordinary person to get South African citizenship?
It's become very difficult. So prior to 2010, it was far easier. If you proved you were a descendant of a South African, irrespective of your age, you could apply for South African citizenship and it would be granted to you. Now you no longer, the section relating to descendants have been removed and is only available to a child who's been adopted in terms of the Children's Act. If you're born in a foreign country to South African parents, you need to register your birth within 30 days of being born or you lose the right to citizenship. So when you enter with your South African citizen parents, you enter as a foreigner. There are a number of things. So it's become very difficult to qualify and to acquire South African citizenship in terms of the 2010 amendments.
I mean, was citizenship too easily got before 2010? So often we see a knee-jerk legislative response to a bad system, and we then end up having a whole range of unforeseen circumstances. Or was the law, as envisaged in 2010, intended to make it as difficult as possible?
It could have been the knee-jerk issue that you're talking about. It could have been the process is made a bit more difficult to try and address the fact that it was easily granted, to try and address certain. There was a time when foreigners could just go to Home Affairs and let them know that they were born to a South African mother and citizenship would be granted on that basis. So it was probably aimed at addressing that. But it's gone from the one extreme to the other extreme.
Okay, so we're sitting in the opposite extreme now, where at the minister's discretion he can grant citizenship to people whom he believes are worthy of that particular right. But as the parent of a child born outside of the country, what happens to that child when they come in as a foreigner? Do they get citizenship rights after a period of time?
Well, then, so if they're living, let's say one of the parents are British national or has a dual nationality, they're living in Britain, the child is born in Britain and registered with the British authorities and has a British passport. If after 30 days of being born, the parents decide to travel to South Africa with that child, and they approach the Home Affairs, the South African High Commission, the High Commission won't register the birth because they've lost their right. That child will then enter South Africa on a British passport and only entitled to stay for 90 days at a time. The child then needs a long-term visa to allow him or her to live in South Africa with the parents. And because of our new immigration rules, the child can't change status from a visitor to a long-term permit holder, which means the child needs to go back to Britain or back to the UK to apply for a long-term visa. And if the parents make an application for a late registration of birth at Home Affairs, it depends. In law, they won't get it, they shouldn't get it. But again, luck of the draw. Sometimes I've met people who apply for this late registration while the child is 15 and they get it, but it's an error. I've met with someone recently who two of her children are South African citizens born after 2010 in South Africa, and the third child, they won't register the birth. The third child is stateless at the moment.
It sounds like it's like a shambles. It sounds like a dreadful mess, and there is ministerial prerogative to make all of these issues go away. Yet, for whatever reason, Home Affairs chooses to make life difficult. The more concerning element, perhaps, is for expatriates, people living outside of the country, who might take on the citizenship of a second country once they've been, for example, you used the example of the UK, where after 5 years you can be naturalised if you comply with their citizenship laws. At that point, does Home Affairs reserve the right to remove your South African passport?
Well, in terms of the Citizenship Act, yes. So if a South African acquires a foreign nationality by some formal and voluntary act without the minister's prior written consent other than marriage, that foreigner will lose his or her right to South African citizenship status. Most people aren't aware of the fact that they need to acquire the minister's written consent. Most people have been living in the foreign countries for X amount of years, qualify, and they apply. And why do they apply? Because it makes it easier to live. Their immigration is becoming more and more difficult. Countries are closing their borders. Rules are becoming more stringent. So of course, if this is the country they're living in and they're able to qualify for citizenship, why not? So our Citizenship Act, however, on the other hand, says that, well, hold on, if you don't get the minister's consent, you lose your citizenship status. So there's no time period. You're not afforded an opportunity to address it. You either have to apply for an exemption or a resumption afterwards. But if it's a resumption, you need to return to South Africa for at least a year. So when you return, you're living in South Africa as a permanent resident, not as a citizen.
It just seems like there's a whole lot of unnecessary bureaucracy being thrown into the mix, which is designed to confuse perhaps, or perhaps it's just a product of overly eager legislators. What about people who've got dual citizenships, for example, people who might have been born in a different country, have lived in South Africa before 2010 and have been quite legitimately, with one of those little letters that Home Affairs might give you, living with dual citizenship in South Africa? How secure is that dual citizenship?
Well, South Africa, as a general rule, is not against dual citizenship or multiple nationalities. So if you, for example, are a South African citizen by birth and you have a foreign nationality by descent, which is your inherent right, or by marriage, which is also excluded, South Africa is okay with it. Also, there isn't any compulsion really to declare that you have a foreign nationality. The only time the question is put to you is when you make an application for a South African passport. It will ask you, do you hold any other foreign citizenship? And if you do, on what basis? If you answer, if that answer is yes, and you say by naturalization, it then presents problems. But if it's by descent or by marriage or by any other inherent right which doesn't qualify as formal and voluntary, you're okay.
Is there a logic to the way in which things are structured right now?
Well, I hope so. It's making it increasingly difficult. If there's an opportunity for a second passport, most people want that right, especially with the way things are happening. So one would hope that there is logic behind this.
Stefanie de Saude, it's certainly very good for the immigration law business, no doubt. Stefanie de Saude is an immigration and citizen law specialist at De Saude Attorneys, on the line to us this evening from Cape Town. Thanks very much for joining us, Stefanie. More Moneymakers next time. Thank you so much for watching. And if you've got a spare passport, or access to a spare passport, make sure that it gets kept up to date and dusted off so it doesn't look like you haven't touched it for the last 5 years. Otherwise, somebody might want to come and take it away from you. Till next time, bye-bye.